Racist cops make black girl kneel in court. Then she says something that shocks all. The gavel struck like thunder. Its sharp crack echoed off the faded wood-paneled walls of the Harmony Creek County Courthouse, a place that wore injustice like an old overcoat, weathered, familiar, and no longer shocking. The room fell into a deep, unnatural silence as Judge Ronald Whitaker, a man known more for his contempt than his convictions, stared down from his raised bench with cold authority. "Kneel," he commanded. The single word cut through the stillness like a blade. In the center of the courtroom stood a young black girl, no more than 19. Her orange jumpsuit hung loose over her slender frame, and her wrists were cuffed tightly in front of her. Her name, as the docket read, was Tiana Brooks. Tiana didn't move. Gasps rippled quietly through the courtroom, though no one dared speak. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably. The two officers who'd arrested her, Officers Blake Rourke and Daniel Sutter, stood nearby, their postures tense but their smirks undeniable. They had seen this play out before. Judge Whitaker issued strange, cruel demands on people like Tiana. The courtroom always bowed to his power. Always. But Tiana Brooks wasn't like the others. She lifted her chin slightly, the soft overhead light catching the edge of her jawline, revealing a small bruise fading near her temple. Her voice, when it came, was not loud, but it carried. "Your Honor," she said, her tone even, "I don't understand this request." Whitaker leaned forward, his face twisting into something smug and mean. "You don't understand?" he repeated, voice oozing with mockery. "You're in my courtroom, young lady. I gave you a lawful order. If you refuse, I'll add criminal contempt to your charges." Tiana blinked slowly. Her brown eyes didn't waver. She didn't flinch. She didn't tremble. "With respect, Your Honor," she said, "asking me to kneel isn't lawful. It's humiliation, and I will not do it." Whitaker's face went red. In the gallery, a few heads turned. A man in a maintenance uniform leaned forward slightly. A woman, sitting with her teenage son, held her breath. Officer Rourke took a step toward Tiana, his boots echoing on the tile. He looked down at her like she was dirt underfoot. "You heard the judge," he said, voice thick with disdain. "Don't make it worse for yourself." Tiana's wrists shifted slightly in the cuffs, but she didn't back away. "I'm already in a jumpsuit," she said. "You can't make it worse." "Only clearer." Officer Sutter chuckled, already reaching for the baton at his hip. He took a step behind her, ready to act. Whitaker slammed the gavel again. "Officers Rourke, Sutter, execute the court's orders. Make her kneel." The tension snapped. Rourke reached for her shoulder, fingers curling. Sutter moved to the back of her legs, his stance wide. But just before their hands touched her, Tiana spoke again. Louder, stronger. "Don't touch me." The officers froze. Her voice no longer trembled. It carried the weight of something different now, something colder, older, more commanding. "Step back," she said. A moment of confusion flickered across Rourke's face. Whitaker's voice boomed from the bench. "You are in contempt of court." But the words didn't have the same power now. Something had shifted. Tiana slowly raised her cuffed hands and tugged at the seam of her prison jumpsuit's collar. From beneath the orange fabric, a small black patch appeared. It shimmered faintly under the courtroom lights. The air felt suddenly electrified. Every person in the room leaned forward. Tiana's voice, now unshakable, filled the silence. "My name is Tiana Brooks. I'm a federal undercover operative embedded under direct order from the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice." The room gasped. Rourke took a full step back. Sutter's eyes darted toward the exit. Judge Whitaker's mouth opened, then closed. Then opened again. What is this?" he stammered. "This is a farce." This is staged." Tiana kept speaking, eyes trained on the judge. "This courtroom, Your Honor, has been under investigation for systemic abuse, racial discrimination, and civil rights violations. Every word, every action, including your order to make me kneel, has been recorded with full authorization." She turned slightly, gesturing to a man in the back row who had previously seemed like a disinterested court observer. He stood up now, calmly, flashing a badge of his own. "Special Agent Leo McKay," he said, "DOJ Civil Rights Division. We've been recording from multiple angles since the arraignment began." The silence that followed was not just shock. It was devastation. Rourke muttered, "This is bulls," but didn't finish the sentence. His hand dropped away from his baton. Tiana took one small step forward, speaking now directly to the crowd as much as the judge. "This courtroom has become a stage for injustice, and today it ends. Not because of me, but because the law finally showed up to watch." Whitaker sputtered, "This is an ambush. You don't have jurisdiction." "You gave it to me," Tiana interrupted sharply, "when you let your robe hide your hate. When you used your bench to demand submission, and when you let officers like them," she nodded at Rourke and Sutter, "treat citizens like animals." By now, 3 other DOJ agents had entered quietly and taken positions along the back wall. One began collecting evidence. Another had already approached the court clerk, asking to seal the courtroom for federal review. Whitaker sat down heavily. "Your Honor," Agent McKay said calmly, "you are officially suspended from presiding over this courtroom. You are to remain seated until federal marshals arrive." No one moved. Then someone clapped. A single clap. From the woman with the teenage son. Then another joined. Then another. The applause rose not in triumph, but in exhausted, relieved defiance. Tiana remained still. She didn't smile. She didn't cry, but her shoulders eased just barely, and when she finally looked up again, it was toward the young black girls watching from the back benches. She didn't say it aloud, but they saw it in her face. "You don't have to kneel for justice. You rise to claim it." The hum of tension still clung to the walls of the courtroom, even after the gavel had stopped echoing and Judge Whitaker had gone pale behind the bench. No one dared move as Special Agent Leo McKay took over, quietly instructing his team to secure the evidence. The camera in his briefcase continued rolling. Officer Blake Rourke and Officer Daniel Sutter had stepped away from Tiana Brooks like she was radioactive, though they kept throwing glances at each other, uncertain whether to bolt or brace for arrest. Tiana stood motionless, her cuffs now removed by one of the DOJ agents. She rubbed her wrists absent-mindedly, but never lost that steel in her spine. Her voice still lingered in the air, that commanding tone that had turned the courtroom upside down only minutes before. No one was looking at her like a suspect now. They were looking at her like something they'd never seen before. A storm with a badge. The door creaked open at the rear of the courtroom, and U.S. Marshal Devin Tate walked in, 6'4", built like a linebacker, calm as a surgeon. He took one look at the scene, nodded once to Tiana, then made his way up the aisle, heels sharp against the tile. When he reached the bench, he pulled a document from his coat pocket and handed it to the judge. "Judge Whitaker," he said evenly, "you are hereby placed on administrative leave pending a federal investigation. Please step down from the bench." The silence cracked. Whitaker, red-faced and trembling, sputtered, "You don't understand the damage you're doing. You're going to destroy this community's trust." "You already did," Tiana replied before the marshal could answer. Whitaker opened his mouth again, but McKay raised a hand. "Save it." We've got everything on record, including the order to force a black teenager to kneel in open court for no legal reason. You'll have time to explain it to a federal grand jury." Two more marshals appeared at the rear, and Whitaker, grumbling incoherently, finally stepped down. The chair groaned under him as he left it for the last time. As the agents began collecting files and interviewing stunned court staff, Tiana stepped outside into the muggy Georgia air. The courthouse steps, once a place where fear loomed, were now flooded with whispers and camera flashes. News vans had begun to line the street, and locals were crowding in behind the caution tape. Some were silent, others craned their necks trying to see the girl who had flipped the entire power structure upside down in one afternoon. A young boy, 10, maybe 11, stood near the bottom step holding his mother's hand. He looked at Tiana with wide eyes, then said quietly, "You didn't let them make you do it." Tiana knelt slightly, just enough to meet his gaze. "No, and you don't ever have to either." His mother teared up. "Thank you," she whispered. Inside the command van, parked 2 blocks away, Assistant Director Miranda Shaw watched the footage feed with narrowed eyes. She had known Tiana since she was 23, fresh out of Georgetown law, already fierce and unshakable. Shaw didn't smile often, but as Tiana re-entered the building with her head held high, she allowed herself the briefest flicker of pride. "Phase 1 is complete," Shaw said to her team. "But it's just the judge," her deputy replied. "Rourke and Sutter are still on the street." Not for long. Later that evening, Tiana sat alone in a safe house on the edge of Harmony Creek. Her civilian clothes were back on, jeans, sneakers, and a deep green hoodie. The scar under her left eye still throbbed from the force of the cuffs earlier that week, but she didn't care. What mattered was what came next. Her laptop was open to a DOJ encrypted file. She scrolled past the video feed of Whitaker's courtroom breakdown, past the arrest warrant drafts, and paused at a folder labeled Internal Whistleblowers. She clicked it. Inside was a single video, a statement from a young black woman named Amaya Reynolds, formerly a clerk in Whitaker's courtroom. In the recording, Amaya spoke haltingly but clearly about years of seeing unequal sentencing, racial slurs whispered behind chambers, and orders from Whitaker to make it stick when charges looked flimsy, especially if the defendant was black or Latino. Amaya had quit 2 months earlier, moved across state lines. But Tiana had found her, and this statement, now corroborated with real-time evidence, would become the next stone in the foundation of justice they were building. Tiana's phone buzzed. It was Leo. "We have confirmation," he said. "Rourke's dashcam from last month was quietly deleted from CPD servers. But our tech team pulled a backup. Shows him threatening a teenage boy over a fake curfew violation. Did the boy press charges? He didn't know he could." Tiana swallowed hard. "We'll fix that." A pause. "There's more," Leo added. "We think Sutter's been planting evidence, not just once. We've got leads from a private investigator tied to at least 4 cases. Then we go for both," she said. "Together. Tomorrow. We're calling in the oversight team." Tiana hung up and sat back. Her eyes scanned the room, bare walls, government-issued furniture, the flickering light above the sink, and she smiled for the first time in days. Not because it was over, but because the fight was finally being fought on her terms. Outside, the wind picked up, and in Harmony Creek, for the first time in years, so did the hope. The following morning, the sleepy streets of Harmony Creek buzzed with something the town hadn't felt in years, unrest that no longer lived in the shadows. Rumors spread fast. They always did in places like this, but this time the whispers didn't carry fear. They carried anticipation. For the first time, the people weren't just bracing for bad news. They were waiting for change. Tiana Brooks stepped into the Community Justice Center's temporary command post, a converted daycare building now equipped with rolling monitors, secured lines, and federal-grade encryption. She was no longer playing a role, no orange jumpsuit, no soft-spoken deference. Just a woman walking in her own skin, unapologetic and exacting. Leo McKay met her near the conference table, tapping his tablet with practiced urgency. "We just got confirmation." Whitaker's arrest made national headlines. DOJ's press team handled it tightly. They used coded language, pending investigation, judicial overreach. But everyone knows what it means. "And the locals?" Tiana asked, grabbing a case file and flipping through it. "Half are still in shock. The other half are angry. But not at us. It's like you flipped a switch in this town." Tiana nodded slowly. "Then let's keep the lights on." Leo pointed to the monitor on the far wall where a video loop played grainy body cam footage from Officer Rourke's patrol 2 weeks ago. The screen showed a 15-year-old named Caleb Foster being shoved against the hood of a police cruiser, his backpack thrown open on the sidewalk. He wasn't resisting. He wasn't armed, but Rourke had a hand on his neck, barking about a curfew violation that didn't exist. "He said the kid fit a description," Leo muttered. "Except he was a full foot shorter than the actual suspect and didn't even own a hoodie." Tiana didn't respond. She already knew the pattern. She had lived it. Her phone buzzed. A text from Amaya Reynolds, the former court clerk who'd testified against Whitaker. Got a name. "Someone in records is ready to talk. They've been shredding files." Tiana looked up. "They're destroying evidence." Leo's jaw tightened. "They must know we're coming. Then we hit them before they can hide it all." By noon, the team had split into 3 units, one staking out the records room at the police department, one quietly coordinating with sympathetic public defenders, and Tiana's own team preparing to confront Officers Rourke and Sutter directly. Tiana and Agent Erin Chen, a surveillance specialist with the instincts of a chess master, drove past the Harmony Creek Diner, heading toward the precinct. They parked just around the corner from the building and watched the flow of traffic through binoculars. "There," Erin said, pointing. Sutter just pulled into the back lot. Alone. Tiana grabbed her badge and checked the minicam clipped beneath her collar. "Let's go." Inside the precinct, it was business as usual. Phones ringing, cops laughing too loudly over stale coffee, the scent of bureaucracy hanging heavy. But beneath the normalcy, eyes shifted when Tiana walked in. Some stared, some flinched, and some, especially the younger black officers, held her gaze just long enough to say, silently, "I see you." Officer Sutter was at his desk, feet up, watching a sports video on his phone. His partner, Rourke, was nowhere in sight. Tiana stepped in front of his desk. "Daniel Sutter?" He looked up lazily, then blinked. "You again." "I'm not Sarah Bell," she said. "I'm Special Agent Tiana Brooks, Civil Rights Division." "You're under federal investigation." He laughed once, short and forced. "For what? Doing my job?" Tiana placed a folder on his desk, flipping it open. Inside were stills from multiple body cam videos, statements from past complainants, and a copy of Caleb Foster's school attendance records. "You've been planting stops, harassing minors. And you're not even subtle about it. You know the community calls you and Rourke the Trap Brothers." Sutter's smile faded. "You had a pattern." "But you got lazy," Tiana continued. "Same language, same spots, same fake charges. You thought no one would catch it." He stood up. "You can't just walk in here and throw accusations around." Erin stepped beside her, holding out a signed federal warrant. "She's not throwing. She's serving." Before Sutter could move, 2 internal affairs agents stepped from the hallway behind him. One placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're coming with us." The look on Sutter's face wasn't rage, it was confusion, the kind born from years of unaccountability. He didn't know what it felt like to be on the other side of power. As he was led away, Tiana turned to Erin. "Where's Rourke?" Erin tapped her earpiece. Lasping was a mile outside town, at the county landfill. The landfill? Guess where they've been dumping files? 15 minutes later, they arrived at the site. It wasn't hard to find him. His cruiser was parked awkwardly near a chain-link fence, trunk wide open. Rourke stood at a burn barrel, tossing in stacks of papers like he was feeding a fire god. When he saw Tiana and Erin approaching, his hands froze. "You're trespassing," he said, already defensive. "You're destroying evidence," Tiana shot back, "and you're caught. I didn't do anything illegal." "You ordered a teenage girl to kneel in open court," she said. "You helped enforce a racist command from a judge who's now been removed from the bench. You've been pulling kids off the street, intimidating witnesses, and today you're burning files with their names on them." He reached toward his belt. Erin's hand hovered near her own. "Don't," Tiana warned. "There's nowhere to go." For a second, his hand lingered. Then it dropped. An hour later, Rourke and Sutter were in federal custody. Harmony Creek's police department issued a statement that afternoon calling the arrests deeply troubling but insisting they would cooperate fully. Behind the scenes, however, Tiana knew the pushback would come. They always pushed back. But for now, they were ahead. At sunset, she sat on the hood of a car outside the courthouse, watching as more locals gathered. Some carried signs. Some carried stories. And all of them were beginning to realize the same truth. Power doesn't shift on its own. Someone has to push it, and Tiana Brooks had pushed hard enough to crack the foundations. The town of Harmony Creek was changing, and it knew it. You could see it in the way people whispered less and spoke more. The morning after Officers Rourke and Sutter were taken into federal custody, there was no grand announcement, no sirens or speeches, but there didn't have to be. The message had already rippled out. The ones who had once ruled the streets with sneers and batons were now the ones behind glass, answering questions they couldn't wriggle away from. Tiana Brooks arrived at the Harmony Creek courthouse in silence. The building looked the same faded columns, same cracked steps, but there was something different in the air, a cautious hope. She walked past the metal detector, nodding briefly at the security guard, who gave her a look of quiet admiration. She wasn't there to testify, not yet. She was there to watch, to observe. Because the next target wasn't a cop. It was the man who had made the kneeling order possible in the first place, Judge Ronald Whitaker. Inside courtroom 2B, Whitaker's emergency hearing was about to begin. He was still technically a judge, though now stripped of his gavel, his robes, and most of his dignity. The court had agreed to hold a public hearing to determine whether he should be removed from the bench permanently pending the results of the DOJ investigation. Whitaker sat at the defendant's table with his attorney, a clean-cut man named Wallace Granger, who wore a $2,000 suit and the expression of someone still pretending this could all be undone. Tiana took her seat quietly in the back row, joining Leo McKay and Erin Chen. She scanned the room, press in the corner, 2 DOJ agents near the wall, and a few locals, including a mother whose son had once been sentenced to 6 months for missing a court date. She held his picture in her lap like a prayer. The judge presiding over the hearing was a temporary assignment, Judge Denise Calloway, a visiting federal judge from Atlanta, sharp, no nonsense, and known for cutting through legal theater like a surgeon. She entered without flair and took her seat. "This is a preliminary hearing regarding complaints of judicial misconduct and abuse of authority by Judge Ronald Whitaker," she began, her voice calm but razor-edged. The court will hear from the Department of Justice representative first. Jordan Avery, the lead DOJ litigator for the case, stood and adjusted his tie. He didn't waste time. This court has reviewed extensive documentation, videos, transcripts, sworn affidavits. But beyond the data is the pattern. Judge Whitaker routinely imposed disproportionate sentences on defendants of color, interrupted their legal counsel, and in multiple instances issued commands that violated constitutional rights. The most egregious, ordering a teenage girl, Tiana Brooks, then undercover as a defendant, to kneel before the court as a condition of avoiding contempt charges. Gasps echoed in the courtroom. Granger was on his feet in an instant. Objection. The agent in question misled the court by operating under false pretenses. This was entrapment, not justice. Judge Calloway raised an eyebrow. False pretenses or not, your client gave the order. Are you disputing that? Granger hesitated. No, but the context. Context doesn't erase reality, Calloway said sharply. A pause followed. Then Jordan Avery spoke again. We are seeking not only Whitaker's removal, but a full audit of every case he presided over in the last 10 years. Because one order doesn't happen in a vacuum. This was a culture, a quiet rot beneath the surface of the law. Tiana could feel the room holding its breath. Granger countered with his own argument, a tired one. My client has served this town for over 30 years. He's ruled on thousands of cases. He's not a racist. He's a man who made a mistake under pressure. Tiana leaned toward Leo and whispered, They always say it's just one mistake. Like it didn't come after 100 whispers. Leo nodded. That's how silence stays in power. Just as the hearing seemed to wind down, something unexpected happened. A woman stood up from the gallery. She wore a navy business suit and held a folder in her hands. Her voice was quiet but firm. Your Honor. I'm Marissa Goodwin, former deputy clerk for Judge Whitaker. I request permission to speak. Granger objected immediately, but Judge Calloway waved him off. You have 1 minute, she said. Marissa stepped forward. I worked in Whitaker's chambers for 5 years. I typed transcripts, prepared statements, and I saw things that made me sick. The pattern you're hearing about. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't accidental. He called black defendants repeat problems. He mocked them during breaks. Once, after a mother begged for leniency for her son, he said, and I quote, They know how to cry, but not how to behave. I stayed quiet because I thought I'd lose my job. But now, her voice cracked slightly, I realize I should have spoken sooner, and I will testify under oath if needed. A stunned silence gripped the room. Judge Calloway looked toward Granger. Would the defense like to respond? Granger looked at his client, but Whitaker didn't speak. Because what could he say? That the words weren't his? That the entire room imagined it? That the videos lied? He stared ahead, pale and unmoving. The judge turned back to the court. This hearing is adjourned. A decision will be issued within 72 hours. Until then, Judge Whitaker remains suspended from the bench. As the gavel struck, the courtroom slowly rose to its feet. Tiana stepped out into the sunlight. She exhaled. Outside, a local reporter caught up with her. Agent Brooks, do you have a comment on what just happened in there? She stopped. Yes, she said. This isn't justice. Not yet, it's the beginning. A system doesn't heal overnight. But you can't clean a wound if you're too afraid to look at it. She kept walking, because there was more to do. And for the first time in Harmony Creek, people were actually watching. Tiana had thought walking out of that courtroom would bring peace, that some switch would flip inside her and the burden would lift. But justice was never that clean. It doesn't untangle years of abuse in one hearing or undo the shame burned into people's memories by men like Judge Whitaker. It was nearly midnight when her phone buzzed with a message from Erin Chen. "You should see this." She tapped the link. It led to a video on a lesser-known alt-right blog. The thumbnail was a freeze frame of her, eyes sharp, jaw clenched, speaking at the courthouse steps. The title, "Fake Victim Agent Destroys Due Process in Harmony Creek." Tiana's jaw tightened. She scrolled through the comments. A mess of slurs, conspiracy theories, and outright lies. They accused her of infiltrating the town to manufacture chaos. One comment read, "She's the DOJ's new puppet," pretending to be a victim so they can federalize the South. Another simply said, "She should have kneeled." She closed the screen. Later, in the safe house's dimly lit kitchen, she poured herself a glass of water and sat in silence. The tension in her shoulders wouldn't go away. Not even now. Leo entered, holding his laptop. He looked like he hadn't slept. "They're pushing hard online," he said, not needing to explain. "They're scared," Tiana replied, her voice low. He nodded. "And desperate." Then he handed her a folder. "What's this?" "Unsealed case logs from Whitaker's private docket." Jordan pulled strings with the oversight board. "There's one that doesn't sit right." Tiana opened it and scanned the summary. A 17-year-old named Ellis Hammond. Arrested for resisting during a noise complaint. No prior offenses, no weapons. No drugs, but sentenced to 9 months in a juvenile detention center on the outskirts of town. She frowned. Why does this feel familiar? Because Ellis filed a written complaint from lockup. Said Whitaker had called him another loudmouth black punk in chambers before sentencing. It was buried, never followed up. Tiana's mind raced. Where is he now? Leo looked grim. He never made it out. He was found unconscious in his cell 3 weeks before release. Official cause of death, seizure due to pre-existing condition. Except Ellis had no medical history of seizures, she whispered. Leo confirmed with a nod. And guess which officers made the arrest? She closed her eyes. Rourke and Sutter. Tiana stood up. We need his case files, all of them. Medical reports, visitation logs. If they silence that kid to protect themselves. Leo finished her thought. Then the entire department is sitting on a corpse to keep the machine running. The next morning, Erin joined them as they scoured public records. Hidden among dozens of redacted lines and vague legal jargon, they found a pattern. Juveniles of color who got disproportionately harsh sentences under Whitaker, often after being arrested by Rourke or Sutter. Some were released with permanent records. Some disappeared entirely from follow-up reports. It was bigger than Tiana had imagined. By noon, Jordan Avery called. There's something you need to hear, he said. I was just handed an internal memo. From who? Anonymous, sent through encrypted email. The subject line read, The Basement. Tiana went still. What basement? The one under the old courthouse archives building. Apparently, files from the early 2000s were never digitized. Some cases never even entered the main court system. We think unofficial trials held off the books. Her blood chilled. You think Whitaker ran a shadow docket? We don't know yet, but if those documents exist, they're not legal, and they sure as hell aren't clean. Tiana didn't hesitate. I'm going there. Leo looked alarmed. It's not safe. That's why we go tonight, quiet. No backup. Jordan's voice was stern. You're not going in alone. Then come with me, but I'm not waiting. That night, beneath a cold drizzle and the flicker of a faulty streetlight, Tiana and Jordan stood outside the archive building's rusted side entrance. Erin had disabled the camera feeds for 20 minutes, giving them just enough of a window. Inside, the air was thick with dust and disuse. The basement door was wedged shut with a metal bar. Jordan pried it loose. They descended the stairs slowly. The basement was more storage bunker than filing room. Old cabinets lined the walls. Cobwebs clung to broken furniture, but near the back, behind a sheet of plastic and a cracked wooden door, they found a locked cabinet stamped with the words, "Do not transfer." Jordan picked the lock. Tiana opened the drawer. Inside were dozens of manila folders, all unmarked except for case numbers. She flipped through one. A 14-year-old girl charged with petty theft. No name, no public record. Just a sentence written in neat cursive. 3 months. No family contact. Another folder. A boy, 16. Obstructing law enforcement. No lawyer listed. Sentenced to 4 months in private juvenile holding. Jordan's hands shook as he read. They were building a pipeline, off-the-books incarceration. For profit or power, maybe both. And then Tiana found it, Ellis Hammond. Case number C-289. Her hands trembled as she read the final page. Sentenced in a closed hearing. Defense waived. Parental rights suspended. Final signature. Judge Ronald Whitaker. It wasn't just misconduct. It was systemic trafficking through the law. Tiana stepped back, breath shallow. We take all of this. Every folder, every page, Jordan nodded. We blow the lid off the whole damn courthouse. But just as they started packing, they heard footsteps above. And a voice, muffled but unmistakable. I thought the feds would try this. Tiana and Jordan froze. Then she whispered, That's Whitaker. Jordan cursed under his breath. He's not alone. The trap had been laid. But Tiana didn't panic. She looked at the files in her arms. Then toward the door. And for the first time in a long time she smiled, not out of joy, but because they had what they needed. Even if they didn't walk out with it tonight, the truth was already in their hands. The storm had finally arrived in Harmony Creek, and this time it was coming for the architects. The basement air grew colder as Whitaker's voice echoed faintly down the stairs. Tiana's pulse thudded in her ears. Jordan reached for his phone, but the signal was dead. No bars, no backup. They were on their own. She stuffed the folder with Ellis Hammond's case into her bag, then grabbed 2 more with matching numbers. Jordan did the same, silently counting seconds in his head. Above them, boot steps scuffed across old linoleum. The sound wasn't rushed. Whoever was up there wasn't searching. They were waiting. Whitaker's voice came again, louder now. You think I didn't see this coming? You thought I'd sit back and let some fed crawl around my town like she owns it? Tiana stepped toward the door, eyes locked on the narrow strip of light from the stairwell. He's baiting us, trying to rattle us. Jordan moved beside her. It's working. They crept up the stairs, slow and quiet. Just before the top step, Tiana pulled back Jordan's arm and whispered, Let me go first. If they see you, they might shoot. But me? They'll hesitate. They still think I'm the girl in the jumpsuit. Jordan hesitated, then nodded. Be careful. Tiana cracked the door open, just enough to peer into the hallway. Whitaker stood with 2 figures, Rourke and Sutter, both armed. Whitaker wore a long coat over a suit, his tie askew, his face puffed and red like someone who hadn't slept in days. His hand trembled slightly as he gestured toward the stairwell. She's down there, and if she's still got those files, we've got a problem. I say we just go in, Rourke muttered. 1 shot clean. Call it self-defense. No, Whitaker snapped. Not yet. She needs to disappear, not become a martyr. That was enough. Tiana kicked the door open hard. All 3 men spun around. She stepped out, hands raised, but not in surrender. "You've already lost." Whitaker took a step back, stunned. "You think you're holding the cards?" Tiana continued. "We already made copies. Every file in that cabinet already uploaded. The DOJ has them. The Oversight Committee, the press." Whitaker's face twitched, a mix of disbelief and desperation. "You're bluffing," Tiana smiled. "You willing to bet your freedom on it?" For a moment no one moved. Then Sutter raised his weapon, but Jordan appeared behind Tiana, rifle in hand, non-lethal DOJ issue. "You shoot, you die with her, your call." Sutter froze. Tiana advanced. "You're going down for Ellis Hammond, for every sealed case, for every kid you railroaded through your kangaroo court." Whitaker's voice cracked. "You don't understand what this place was before I came. There was chaos, no order. I gave them structure. I gave them justice. You gave them fear," Tiana shot back. "You ruled by it." "But it ends tonight." Whitaker laughed bitterly. "You think people care about justice? They care about control." "And I had it." "Not anymore," Tiana said. Sirens wailed in the distance, faint but growing louder. It wasn't backup for Whitaker. It was the cavalry, the real one. Rourke glanced at Sutter. "We need to run." "No," Whitaker muttered. "No, no, no." Tiana pulled out her phone. "You want to see who's listening right now?" She tapped the screen, projecting a voice call to the speaker. "This is Agent Carter from DOJ HQ. We have received all files. The location has been geotagged. Harmony Creek Courthouse is now under federal lockdown authority." Jordan raised his voice. "Drop your weapons." Sutter obeyed. Rourke hesitated, but then let his pistol clatter to the ground. Whitaker stayed frozen. Outside, tires screeched to a halt. Multiple cars. Doors slammed. Federal agents flooded in, some in suits, others in tactical vests. They poured into the hallway, weapons raised, orders sharp and efficient. Tiana backed away as two agents stepped forward and restrained Rourke and Sutter. Whitaker stood motionless until an agent placed a hand on his shoulder. Only then did he collapse into the wall like air had been sucked from his lungs. Jordan leaned toward Tiana. "We just broke the spine of a system." "No," she said. "We just exposed it." "Breaking it is going to take a hell of a lot more." The agents led the three men away as Tiana looked on. Whitaker tried to glance back, but her eyes locked on his and didn't flinch. That look said it all. "You underestimated me. You underestimated the people you hurt, and now the scales are finally tipping." In the following days, the fallout was immense. National news anchors picked up the story. DOJ agent exposes shadow sentencing network in Southern Courthouse ran across every major feed. Ellis Hammond's name trended online. His mother, previously too scared to speak, came forward, her voice cracking as she said, "He didn't deserve to die forgotten." Files from the basement showed more than just sentencing abuse. Some were connected to private prison contractors, suggesting kickbacks, profit-sharing, real corruption embedded deep. Tiana stood before the House Civil Rights Committee and testified under oath. Her voice steady, her presence resolute. When asked what drove her to go undercover, she didn't hesitate. Because power can't go unchecked, not when it disguises itself as justice, and because kids like Ellis don't get second chances unless someone fights for them. The country listened. Legislation began forming. New rules on judge oversight, case transparency, and independent public defenders. Real reform, not perfect, but progress. As for Tiana, she didn't disappear. She spoke across the country, at law schools, at civil rights conferences, on panels about justice and integrity. But when she was alone, when the lights dimmed and the noise faded, she'd think of the courtroom, of the moment Whitaker ordered her to kneel, and of the power in saying no. In that refusal, she had cracked a system built on silence. And now its echoes were ringing through every corner of the country. The courtroom was packed. A week had passed since Tiana's undercover identity had been revealed, and the Department of Justice had seized the Harmony Creek courthouse. But now came the part that wasn't just headlines or hashtags. This was the trial, the one that would determine if justice was real or just another performance. Tiana, no longer in disguise, sat at the front of the courtroom beside Assistant U.S. Attorney Malik Reeves. She wore a tailored black blazer, her natural curls pinned back from her face, her posture as firm as steel. Every eye in the room followed her movements, not out of curiosity anymore, but respect. Some whispered her name as she passed. Others simply nodded. The girl who stood tall when ordered to kneel had become a symbol. Across the aisle, Judge Whitaker sat in a stiff gray suit, eyes sunken, face pale. Gone was the arrogance. Gone was the sneer. Rourke and Sutter sat beside him, separated by two defense attorneys who looked like they were being paid just enough to pretend they cared. The judge presiding over the case now was a federal appointee brought in from Atlanta, Judge Evelyn Crawford. A black woman in her late 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor and a reputation for zero tolerance when it came to courtroom corruption. The media had been barred from broadcasting, but sketch artists captured every detail, every grimace. Every gasp, every shift in the air. Malik Reeves stood first. His voice calm, but it carried. This case is not just about one judge, two officers, or one courthouse. It is about a system. A belief that authority is enough to silence truth. But today, the truth gets the floor. He laid out the charges: conspiracy to violate civil rights, abuse of authority, obstruction of justice, and malicious prosecution. For Whitaker, additional counts included falsification of records and coercion of witnesses. Then came the evidence: video footage of Tiana's arrest, the courtroom confrontation, the illegally ordered kneeling, audio recordings captured from Tiana's wire where Whitaker had said, "You people don't get to challenge me," and chuckled with Rourke about putting them in their place. The jury winced more than once. Then the prosecution brought up the sealed case files. Names, faces, sentences 3, 4, 5 times harsher than their white counterparts for the same charges. A pattern so deliberate, so methodical, it was undeniable. And then, the moment the entire courtroom leaned in for witness testimony. The first was Maya Hammond, Ellis Hammond's sister. She stood firm, clutching her brother's photo. "My brother was 17. He missed curfew." That's it. But they made him a criminal. They put him in a cage. And then he disappeared inside it. Reeves nodded solemnly as the courtroom sat in stunned silence. Next came a former public defender who'd quit after years of watching black and brown clients get steamrolled in Whitaker's courtroom. He testified how judges like Whitaker would stack the deck from the start, coercing guilty pleas, ignoring exculpatory evidence. But it was Tiana's turn that silenced the room. She took the stand, not as an agent, not as an enforcer, but as a woman who'd walked into fire to expose it. "I didn't kneel," she said, her voice steady. "Because if I did, I knew there'd be 10 more girls like me behind bars tomorrow, forced to kneel the same way. I didn't go into Harmony Creek to start a war. I went in to show the world what it refused to look at." Reeves asked softly, "And what did you find?" Tiana looked out over the courtroom, her eyes locking with jurors, then Whitaker. "I found men so comfortable with their power, they thought justice was theirs to bend. I found fear wearing a badge. And I found courage in every defendant who kept their head up while being crushed by the weight of a system that never saw them. The cross-examination from Whitaker's attorney was aggressive. "You misled the court. You played a role." "I did," Tiana agreed, "just like they did. Except I wore the role to reveal truth. They wore theirs to bury it." The courtroom murmured, but Judge Crawford let it pass. Outside, protesters gathered. Not in anger, but in solidarity. Candles flickered along the sidewalk. Names of victims: Ellis Hammond, Jasmine Torres, Malik Warren, written in chalk beside messages like "Truth Matters" and "End the Silence." Inside, the defense tried one last trick, painting Whitaker as a man overwhelmed by a failing system. "He was trying to hold the town together," his attorney argued. "Sometimes tough choices had to be made." But it rang hollow. The DOJ brought forth one final surprise witness, a retired clerk from Harmony Creek, an older white woman named Carol Ames. She'd worked under Whitaker for 11 years. With trembling hands, she told the court, "I was part of it. Not directly, but I saw things. Things I justified as normal, but they weren't. I watched boys go away for years when they should have gone home. I typed the orders. I filed the transcripts. I told myself it wasn't my place. But now, I know it was." Her voice cracked. "Silence is complicity, and I won't be silent anymore." Even Whitaker looked down. As court recessed for the day, Tiana walked out into a sea of quiet support. A little girl, maybe 9, stood holding her mother's hand. She wore a shirt that read, "I won't kneel either." Tiana crouched down, smiled, and said, "Good. Don't." Back inside the courthouse, Judge Crawford called the attorneys into chambers. She said, "Tomorrow we begin closing arguments, but let me be clear. This courtroom isn't going back to what it was. Not under my watch. Make sure your clients understand what they're facing." That night, Tiana sat on her hotel balcony, replaying every second. The tension, the rage, the fear, the unspoken promise to Ellis Hammond that she wouldn't stop halfway. Jordan knocked gently on the door. "You okay?" She nodded. "Just thinking." He handed her a copy of the local paper. The headline read, "She refused to kneel, and justice stood with her." Tiana didn't smile. Not yet. Tomorrow would bring the verdict. And with it, the real test. Not of the law, but of the people. The jury returned after just 3 hours. Outside, the courthouse was blanketed by an uneasy silence, broken only by the sound of footsteps, reporters, and the shuffling of protest signs carried by a crowd that had only grown with each passing day. The buzz in the air wasn't outrage anymore. It was anticipation. Like the city was holding its breath, waiting to see if justice meant something this time. Inside, Tiana sat with her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed ahead. She didn't look at Whitaker. Not because she was avoiding him, but because he no longer mattered. Judge Evelyn Crawford returned to the bench, her presence commanding quiet. She glanced toward the jury box. 12 citizens, none of them professional politicians, none of them courtroom regulars, just people who had seen the truth with their own eyes. "Have you reached a verdict?" she asked. The foreman stood, a middle-aged black man in a crisp brown suit, voice steady. "Yes, Your Honor." "We have." The clerk took the folded paper, unfolded it, then handed it to the judge. Judge Crawford read silently for a moment. When she looked up, her expression gave nothing away. In the case of the United States versus Judge Raymond Whitaker, Officer Scott Rourke, and Officer Blake Sutter, on the charge of conspiracy to violate civil rights, we find the defendants guilty. Gasps filled the room. On the charge of abuse of authority, guilty. Whitaker's face went blank. The lines in his forehead deepened, but he didn't blink. Rourke closed his eyes. Sutter simply stared forward like a man watching the last of his world collapse. On the charge of malicious prosecution, guilty. And on the charge of obstruction of justice, guilty. Judge Crawford let the words settle into the wood-paneled silence. Sentencing will commence immediately. She looked directly at Whitaker. This court finds that you, Raymond Whitaker, exploited your position as a judge to uphold not justice, but bias. You weaponized the bench against those most vulnerable. You turned fear into policy and silence into protection. You are hereby sentenced to 15 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Whitaker flinched. It was the first emotion he'd shown in weeks. She turned to Rourke and Sutter. Officers, Rourke and Sutter, you acted not as guardians of the community, but as predators. You enforced injustice with your fists and cloaked it in the language of law and order. You are each sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. As the gavel came down, the courtroom didn't erupt into cheers. It held still. The moment was too big for noise. Tiana exhaled, slowly, fully. Afterward, she stepped outside into the flash of cameras and the murmur of hundreds who had gathered, waiting. Someone handed her a mic. She didn't plan to speak, but she saw the girl again, the same one with the "I won't kneel" shirt. She was still here. Still watching, so Tiana stepped forward. "My name is Tiana Harris. I came to Harmony Creek wearing another name, another face, and another voice. I did it to expose a truth most people didn't want to see. That racism and abuse of power don't just live on the streets. Sometimes they sit in the judge's chair and wear a badge." She scanned the crowd, meeting eyes, letting it settle in. "I didn't kneel because I knew what that moment would mean, not just for me, but for every black girl who ever sat in a courtroom, told she was too loud, too angry, too much. I stood because someone had to, and I didn't stand alone." A murmur of agreement rippled. Tiana's voice deepened. "The fight for justice doesn't end with a guilty verdict. It ends when we make sure these systems don't just rebuild themselves in silence. It ends when we stop acting like this kind of abuse is rare or shocking. It ends when we believe victims the first time they speak, not when they have a badge to prove it." Someone yelled, "Say that again." Tiana nodded once, then handed back the mic. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low over Harmony Creek, a video clip from her speech went viral. Millions watched as she said, "Justice isn't real until it's equal." Hashtags exploded. #Stand with Tiana, #Kneel to no one, #Justice in Harmony. The Department of Justice announced broader investigations into other small-town courts. Federal oversight was implemented in Harmony Creek. A civilian review board was established, and more people, judges, clerks, public defenders, came forward, admitting they'd seen the signs, admitting they were too afraid to speak. Until now. Tiana returned to Washington, but her work didn't stop. She joined a national task force on racial equity in the judiciary. She spoke at universities, community centers, even churches, not as a symbol, but as someone who understood that real change doesn't come from one moment. It comes from every choice made after, and sometimes she still got letters. One came from the girl in the crowd. It read, "I saw you not kneel, and now I believe I don't have to either." Tiana folded it carefully, tucked it in her drawer, and smiled. To those watching this story, let it be a reminder. You don't need a badge to stand for justice. You don't need a courtroom to speak truth. And you don't have to kneel just because someone tells you to. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to our channel for more true stories where justice doesn't just knock, it kicks the door down, because the system won't fix itself, but we will. Together.